In this video, we're going to talk about 7 things that you may have missed from the New World expansion news. Some of them you may have seen. I've not lived your life. I don't know what you've seen and what you've not, but they're all very interesting. So let me jump in and let's talk about them. The first one is very simple. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all of this. Basically, your aptitude is not getting reset, but you're not going to be ahead of everybody if your aptitude is like very, very high. So if you are logging 200 and aptitude 1000, what's going to happen is you're going to go back to 200 and you're going to have to level up to 250. But then as soon as you get that, your aptitude will revert back to its previous aptitude levels, which would have been 1000. Whilst that number doesn't really mean anything, it's not really changing anything in terms of gameplay. A lot of people were upset that, oh, my efforts sort of are going to be gone and I don't like that. Well, they're not gone, it's staying. Confirmed by Shards on Discord. The next thing I want to bring to your attention is something I did actually mention in my main video, and that is that PVE and PvP is getting separate balance. Now, we're not 100% sure in what guise that will take, but Massively OP is saying that they're going to introduce the beginnings, which is interesting in itself, like the beginnings of a new system that's going to balance things for PvE and PvP separately. So we saw that when they mounted over the flail, that it said that PvP balance wasn't enabled. Presumably that's because it was a test server, right? Nothing crazy there. And actually we sort of knew, because on the main article when they were speaking about Bane, they actually said that they're going to increase the base damage from magic and ranged weapons in PvE to make them more effective alternatives, okay? Well, if you're just increasing the damage for one weapon in PvE versus PvP, then by default you have separate balancing. What extent it will take beyond that, rather than just like damage scaling, obviously we don't know. Will it be like abilities? Will it be effects of abilities? Obviously we don't know, but it is super interesting and something we will keep an eye on. The next thing I want to bring to your attention is simply about artifacts. Artifacts are going to have unique appearances. Now, you can only have one artifact in each sort of, let's call them slots, but it's not a slot. What I mean is you can have one armor that's an artifact, one weapon that's an artifact, and one jewelry piece that is an artifact. However, every artifact in the game has a unique appearance. That means that no other item looks like that. So for you transmog people, that might be something that you want to collect. Also worth noting that they have a perk on them that isn't shared by any other item as well, and I think that's really cool. Now this one is a little bit, well, it's not controversial, but it's a little bit unknown exactly what it means. But the influence change is getting a big revamp, and I think it might be bigger than what it seems just on paper. Basically what I think it is, if there's a time on which that there's an influence push, an influence race, anybody from any faction can go and participate, either attack or defend. And if your faction wins, then you get some rewards, if you participated, of course. So let's say Everfall's being attacked and I go and defend, and if we win the defense, then I get a reward. And if we lose, then I'm not actually sure. I sort of hope there's a little bit of like a reward for participation, not as big as winning, obviously, because otherwise it might be a simple case of, oh, we're losing, then we're just going to give it to them. And I don't really want that. But the key thing here is really that they talk primarily in factions. I don't think there's going to be any change to a company declaring the war or anything like that, because logically it doesn't really make sense. I don't think you can treat wars like invasions where it's just like random people. I mean, it'd be interesting and probably, you know, maybe even better health for the game, but the war people would absolutely hate that, right? And fair enough, it'd be absolute chaos, I think. What's interesting though is I don't think the defender can stop the war. Now, it's a little bit weird that, because I'm pretty sure in some of the dev videos they were like, oh, and now you can actually stop the war. And my concern about that was, well, if you can just defend the war without doing the war, will we actually ever see that many wars? Will the number of wars be decreased? Well, something afoot is happening here, and I'm not 100% sure what. Because here it says, regardless of who wins, the attacking faction with the most influence can escalate the conflict into war. I don't know if that means that if the defender wins, that the attacking faction can still declare war or not. But it's very interesting and something we're going to keep an eye on. I think this whole section here is probably bigger than what we think, but at the minute we don't really know what we should think. But very interesting nonetheless. Now this one right here really hurts me deep in my soul a little bit. Items like the unusual ores and the pollens and that kind of thing, you're only going to be able to use 3 per day. Now the reason that this is a thing is because a lot of people, myself included, have been stockpiling them. We were thinking, oh, we'll get an advantage, we'll be able to level up our gathering professions very quickly by just saving them and then absolutely blitzing through them. And I've actually been saving the green ones because a lot of the time they were like better value for your faction tokens and your gold. However, that now no longer is a thing. You may as well just buy the purple ones, I think. Honestly, I bet they're the best value. And honestly, you're probably only going to use them for a couple of days. If you're trying to rush, you're probably going to be max level in the professions quite quickly anyway. I would still have a few, but there's no need to like stockpile hundreds of these because you aren't going to be able to use 3 a day. A little bit sad, but you know, at least we know now. Probably a good change in fairness, but you know. is what it is. I'm not going to do a weapon breakdown on the flail, but there's something I do want to draw your attention to. The reason I'm not doing a breakdown, by the way, is I'm pretty sure I've seen several core gameplay, Duke's Loft, somebody else whose name I can't quite remember, and I sort of missed that boat. However, the one thing I do want to talk about with the flail is the very simple fact that it does arcane damage. I think it's going to be like a mix of, I think it's strike damage and arcane damage. It's just interesting because I think that's the first arcane damage weapon that does consistently arcane damage, basically. Not only that, let's just talk about the flail in general. The flail looks absolutely insane, very, very crazy. It's got 2 talent trees, one that's sort of like a tanky boy and one that's a support. All the abilities sound cool and visually it looks stunning. Now this next one is a little bit controversial in the community at the moment, and that is that it appears that Umbral Shards are going to get converted into gold in the expansion. Now Umbral Shards are going away, so it's not like the mutations are going to drop them like from the expansion on, but what happens to all the hundreds and thousands and maybe even millions of shards that people have? Well, Massively OP are reporting that the expertise system is gone, and along with it the Umbral Shards, which will be converted to gold. Now, one of the devs on Discord said that we are not ready to comment on that. There is no comment on that, so we don't actually know if it's true. I'm not quite sure why a website would just pluck that out of the air and put it in their article. So I think there's some truth and some merit to it, but whether or not that's something we're going to see as we hit launch, I'm not 100% sure. Now, the reason this is a little bit controversial is that there are some players who literally have millions of shards. Like, that's not an understatement. The speedrunners have millions. There are some players like myself, I've got maybe like 100,000. And then there's PvPers who really don't do M10s very often, who have hundreds of shards and not very many. So there's a question here about fairness. It's like, if we knew it was going to be converted into gold, maybe I would have done more, but maybe the people who have the shards should be rewarded for having the shards. It, you know, there's a whole like kettle of fish there that I'm not necessarily going to dive into. The simple truth is we don't know what is happening to them, and it sounds like it could be gold. To put it in perspective, obviously if you had 1,000,000 shards, well, if 1,000,000 shards was 1 gold, you'd have 1,000,000 gold. That's crazy in itself. And you might think, well, what if it was 0.1? Well, even if you had it as 0.1, 1,000,000 shards would be 100,000 gold. If you did it at 0.1, then 1,000,000 shards would be 10,000 gold, and that sort of seems like it would be relatively pointless at the lower levels. Like if I had 100,000 shards, I think it'd be like 1,000 gold if my maths is like vaguely true. And at that point, you're like, why bother? In theory, if you could do it, what you would actually do is that you'd get more bang for your buck for the lower amount of shards, and then the more shards you had, the less gold you would get to sort of make it make sense. But they're not going to do that. It doesn't really seem like it's worth the time. So I feel like they should ditch this because people are just going to get annoyed by it. But, you know, we'll see what we do. Now, I have done a full video on mounts, and I will leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. But I just want to bring to your attention that there are going to be races. Now, they're being called races, but really, if I'm honest, they are time trials. So they say here participating in small races. It's worth noting that actually what it's going to be is that you're going to have a start line, there's going to be checkpoints, and it's basically who can do it the quickest. You're not racing against anybody, it's just against the clock. And, you know, I don't know if there'll be a leaderboard or anything like that, but I just really like the fact that races are coming into the game, so I wanted to mention it to you. You can tell that because I think that actually is 8 things rather than 7 things, but who's counting? Quick overview on mounts. It sounds like you're going to be able to tame different types. You're going to have to level up your mount, like the actual mount itself goes up to like level 50. You get horses at 25, wolves at 45, and lions at 65. And yeah, it sounds like a really in-depth system, and I'm very excited to see what we get with mounts going forward. I believe one of the devs has said in Discord, I'm not sure if it was on Discord or Twitter actually, that they may actually add different types of animals going forward. So you've seen the mammoths and the other kind of beasts in the game. They might become an option at some point, but right now that's not the case. There's a lot going on at the moment. Obviously, a lot of news is coming out thick and fast, little tidbits here and there. For example, the PTR is not coming this week. It's probably going to be next. But if you want a summary of the whole changes, then I suggest you look at my first video that I did on the expansion. I'll put a link in the description again. That goes through like all of the main summary of changes, all of the huge things that are coming to New World in the expansion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye. If you want to help me, you can become a Patreon, but I've not yet started the graphics, so that's just broken right now, and come follow me on Twitch. Bye.